Hello everybody, and welcome to my tutorial. Rian commented on my 100 Days of Framer project that he would really like to find out how I did the Gooey menu interaction. Gooey as in where the button on screen combined together and moved apart almost like liquid. The effect we're looking for is actually quite easy to achieve. Much of the logic is actually documented online. This designer named Lucas Bieber wrote a very nice article about it on CSS Tricks, which is here. So this is the effect we're looking for. As you can see, they combine very nicely like water. The result of this is actually an element being applied a blur, CSS blur or SVG blur, while its container element has a very high contrast applied to it. So in this case, the diffusion of the base element is captured while the shape is preserved because of the parent contrast, defining the outlines of the shape's contour. Now in Framer, you can achieve this effect in under 20, maybe 30 lines of code. So why don't we start and we'll see how this goes. First, I would like to create a contrast container. Let's just give it a name, contrast container, new layer. Size, of course, will be screen.size. And let's define the device as a phone, iPhone 6. Great. Let's say background color black. We make it black because it's actually hard to pull this off with other base colors, mainly because there isn't enough darkness in the background to make the blurry edges look fine, right? We can try it on a white background, but you'll see later why it doesn't work on a white background. Now, the contrast is really important. For this project, I would like to give it a very high contrast, something like 4,000, just to make sure that we do have a definitive line edge for the shapes we create. Now, main button will be the button that we use to click, and let's give it a size of 200, max y x of 60 pixels from the edge of the screen. So we'll use 60 pixel looks right. So we're going to position that in the corner here. So this would be one way to do it. You could use mid x, mid y, or even simply x and y. The reason we use max is because this is the right edge and bottom edge of this element, and using those two will allow you to easily gauge the number of pixels from the edges. So screen.height, let's say minus 80. So that's where our button will be placed. To make a circle, it's actually very easy. You just do border radius 50%, same thing as CSS. The next thing is where the whole thing could come together, which is applying the blur. In this case, let's do 20. As you can see, 20 is being applied, but you don't see the effect being realized because the contrast is not added on top. So you just see the blur right now. And that's very easy to solve. We can simply give it a parent element, which is the contrast container we just created. So the 4,000 contrast is applied to the main button with 20 blur. Now you don't see anything because we haven't given it a color yet. So let's do, what's a good color? Red is a good color. Let's do crimson. So background color equals to crimson. We know that would work because crimson is a CSS color name. So now you have a circle. Great, and then we don't see the blur, but it looks like it's just a normal circle. So we can prove that this is working just as it would work on the web. Now the next part will be to create the sub layers. We can just simply name them sub buttons. There's an easy way of doing this. So instead of creating 3 or 4 sub buttons, we can put them in a loop. So a for loop is where we can quickly create a series of elements that share similar characteristics. In this case, they share pretty much everything. So sublayer, no, not sublayer, sub button equals to new layer. So we're creating 3 instances layers because there are 3 things being defined here from 0, 1, and 2. So if we were to print this out, print I, you would see that over here there's 0, 1, 2. So we know that's working. And what kind of elements do we want to give the sub layer is a really good question to ask here. Now, in this case, we're just testing it out. So why don't we make it the same as the main button so that we can see the buttons come together and come apart when we define the animation states later. So an easy way to do this would be to just simply give it a prop. So prop stands for properties, and so in this case, subbutton.props equals to main button.props. Great. Let me refresh that. We still see the blur. Why is that? Well, for some reason, prop does not apply the parent element. So we can go in here and manually apply that. Parent equals to contrast. So by applying the proper contrast element, we should see the blur go away. Voila. We see it go away. We don't see the blur anymore. And then we can see it from here, the inspector, that these are in the right order. They all fall under the contrast container. If we were to comment this out, now we see the blur and then these sub buttons are outside of the container. So that's working. We are actually very close to being done, in fact, because what's next is that we just have to add its animation states so that when we click on the main button, the sub buttons will move out and in. And that's pretty easy. We can just do it here. We can say sub button dot states dot add. Let's give it a name. Let's say clicked. When it's clicked, we say max y. So in this case, in my original interaction demo, it was going in 3 different directions, almost like opening a fan. But in this case, why don't we try something different? Why don't we try go pushing upwards? I've seen some UI, mobile UI do that online, so why don't we try that? Max y equals to, this is where a little bit of math would be involved. So we're moving up, right? We're moving up from the bottom edge. So we're taking numbers away from the entire length of the phone, the entire height. So it'll be screen height minus, let's say 100, because there's an arbitrary distance here. That was 80 actually, never mind, minus 80. Minus, this is where we can use the I to quickly apply the different distance if we want the sub button to travel. So in this case, I times maybe I plus 1, since I starts at 0, times main button dot height. So theoretically, we should see the buttons move up by a certain number, by just enough number so that they line up with each other, one above, like that when we click the button. And lastly, we want to apply an animation option to it. But before we do that, why don't we test it out? So main button dot onClick. We're adding an interaction to this main button. So for layers, so instead of, because we didn't define the specific names for these buttons, it will be kind of hard to retrieve them. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to actually just retrieve them on the fly and see what happens. So for layer inside, right. So in this case, there is a containing layer, but for the sake of simpleness, we could create a sub button array where we store these sub buttons. So in this case, we will need to add sub buttons. Sub button array dot push sub button. This function adds each instance of the sub button to this newly created array. The reason we're doing that is because this array feeds into the loop here, so that when we call for layer in sub button array, it knows that it's looping through the layer to look for its child elements, so we can easily manipulate them. In this case, will be simply layer.states.next, so that they move to the next state. Let's try it out. Voila! It's basically working, right? And that was maybe 5 minutes. So right away, we are able to see the effect in action, but it's not perfect. So why don't we apply some good old Framer magic in the form of curves, spring curves, so that it adds a bit of a bounce to everything we do. Now, I think here would be a good place to add it, since we have the button states defined. So the quickest way to add an animation curve option is to add it through the states. So subbutton.states.animation options. I think the syntax is equals curve. Let's say spring 220, something arbitrary to start, so we can visualize it quickly, and that should give us a sense. That's pretty good, but it feels a little bit fast, and I don't like how there's no gap between these. So this means we have to change the height ratio. So this is when trial and error and simply tweaking it would make a lot of difference. So in this case, why don't we deal with the height issue first? I think the easiest fix would be to add a simple gap between each button element. So there we go. That looks about the right distance. Not bad. And the spring curves can be a little bit looser. We don't have to apply so much power and friction to it. Seeing it jiggle back and forth is quite interesting. Let's see it out. Yeah, that's the effect I'm looking for. Maybe a little bit too much force still applied. Let's do 115. There we go. So that's what I had in mind, where it feels like liquid. Yeah, so this is the effect. Now I'm gonna be sharing this prototype with a link attached to this video, so feel free to check it out. And I'm also gonna attach my original prototype I put together for the triangle shaped buttons, so it expands in 3 different directions. So feel free to check that out as well. And that one has icons attached to each button, which is a little bit trickier, but it's not too hard.